G'day guys, today we're going to do a masterclass with my top 10 tricks on how to get the most out of your World Eaters Rhino. We're going to bust some models out onto the table and give you some real world practical demonstrations on how to use these tricks to massive advantage in your game. So with that being said, let's get stuck into the video.
Exalted.
Alrighty guys, before we get started, let's have a quick look at the Rhino's datasheet and talk about some of the standout things that make this unit so good. So one of them, 12-inch move, toughness 9, 3-up save, 10 wounds, 6-up leadership, and 2 OC. This is a really solid profile. It's the standard profile that people think about when they think of a vehicle, and vehicles are inherently quite tough. So it's really, really effective in that regard. Now, its ranged weapons and melee weapons we're not going to bother going into because they're very inconsequential, but the one thing that we will talk about here is its ability. So it has a thing called Meet Any Challenge, and basically in your opponent's movement phase, each time an enemy unit is set up or ends a normal advance or fallback move within 9 inches of this model, any units embarked within it can disembark. Now this is insane, and we're going to show several tricks on how you can use this in conjunction with other World Eaters tricks to do crazy things on the tabletop. But suffice to say, this makes the World Eaters Rhino the best of all rhinos. It's really, really, really good. So for a measly 85 points, this unit is an absolute must-have. And in my opinion, Khorne Berserkers are actually not a very good unit, but because the Chaos Rhino is so amazing, it really does unlock extra potential from that World Eaters unit, that Khorne Berserkers unit, and the Rhino is largely what's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And the Khorne Berserkers get all the credit, Khan the Betrayer gets all the credit, but it's actually the Rhino that is making this unit so effective on the tabletop, because it unlocks so many really, really strong strategies, and we're going to go through all those in a moment. G'day guys, check out our merchandise at exalted40k.com, including sets of range rulers with 9, 6, 3, 2 and 1 inch faces, as well as 1 inch markings all the way along, making quick and accurate measurements a breeze. Rectangular blessings trackers for convenient record keeping, and chain axe blessing trackers for when merely taking records is not good enough. Dice and dice trays that in tandem ensure your rolls do not betray you like a certain someone on the killing fields of Skalathrax. Objective markers for an exalted gaming experience that are just begging to be drowned in the blood of friend or foe on the battlefield. Show your support for the channel and head over to exalted40k.com to equip yourself as an exalted wargamer today. Alright, since we're talking about the Rhino, it would be criminal not to give a little bit of a shout out to the Goretrack Onslaught detachment, because it has some Rhino specific stratagems that are really, really effective. The rest of this video and all of the practical examples are not going to include the Goretrack specific things, because I think most people, when they're going to be playing World Eaters, are not going to be playing the Goretrack, but it would be criminal to not mention them here. Alright, the first one is a stratagem called Endless Pursuit of Violence, and basically what that allows you to do is at the end of the fight phase, if you're within range of a World Eaters transport, your unit can re-embark in the transport. So you could move your Rhino up, you could disembark out, you could charge things, you could kill them, and then you could re-embark into your transport. Or even in your opponent's turn, you could go, cool, you've fought me, I'm near my Rhino, I'm going to re-embark in the transport, and then in the next turn I'm going to launch out from that stage position. There's tons of really cool stuff you can do with this stratagem. The next one, which is a Rhino-specific stratagem, is called Aggressive Disembarkation, and basically you use it in your movement phase to disembark a unit 6 inches instead of the standard 3 inches. Now there's a few ways you could view this. One of them is that it gives you an additional 3 inches worth of movement on that disembark, which is very true, but one of the other caveats is here is that you can set up within engagement range of enemy units. Now this is truly broken, because normally when you're getting into combat, you have to follow the rules for the charges, which means you have to get within base to base with every model that you can. Whereas this allows you to just set up within engagement range. So you could hypothetically set up your entire unit off to one side, preventing the character in their unit that's on the other side from making attacks, things like that. You could do it without them being able to heroically intervene, because you're just setting up within engagement range. You're not making a charge move. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with this aggressive disembarkation stratagem, but I do think that the main utility of it is that when you disembark, instead of disembarking out 3, you're going to disembark out 6 and launch. It also means people can't wrap your Rhino and prevent you from being able to disembark, things like that, which really leans into having a really Rhino heavy army if you're running the Goretrack Onslaught. Alright, next up we have one of my favorite stratagems, the full throttle onslaught, and basically what that's going to allow you to do is in your movement phase, you can move a Rhino, disembark a unit, and then that unit is eligible to charge that turn. Normally, if you've already moved the vehicle, you can't disembark and then charge. You can disembark, but you can't charge afterwards. And if you want to disembark and charge, you have to do it from a stationary vehicle. That vehicle is then free to move off and do whatever it wants after you've disembarked, but typically you have to disembark, then you can move and charge, and then the Rhino can go somewhere else. Whereas if you move the Rhino, then disembark, you can't charge. Whereas this stratagem gets around that, which does a few things. One, it slightly increases the range of those Khorne Berserkers, because the Rhino can move its 12 inches, then you disembark out your 3 inches, so a 15-inch move, as opposed to your normal Khorne Berserker's movement of 8. So it makes your Berserkers a fair bit faster. It also helps play around things like reactive moves, because a reactive move is not triggered when a unit disembarks from a transport that had moved. So if you've got an opponent that has a reactive move, you can move that Rhino up to 9.1 inches away, so you don't trigger their reactive move. Then you can disembark the Khorne Berserkers, they're 3 inches, so you're now 6.1 inches away from the target, and then you can charge, and they don't get an opportunity to reactive move. So there's a few things you can do with the full throttle assault. It's a really cool stratagem, and I really like the theme that it gives the Goretrack Onslaught. Alright, the next stratagem we have is Unrelenting Advance. It's 1 CP in your opponent's shooting phase. After they've shot, you can basically take one of your vehicles that was hit by that attack, and you can reactively move it 6 inches. So this is really cool because it allows you to do a lot of funky stuff with getting your Berserkers into key positions, or reactively getting them out of dangerous positions. So there's cool stuff you can do here. You can also use it to get onto objective markers and things like that. So this is pretty cool, and it's really effective on Rhinos, especially when combined with some of the strategies and tactics that we're going to talk about later in the video. Alright, and then last and not least, we have Fury Unleashed, which is a 1 CP stratagem in your opponent's shooting phase. Just after they've shot at your Rhino, you can essentially disembark the Berserkers that are inside, and then immediately blood surge them as if it was them that got shot. So this is a really, really cool stratagem. It's really going to disincentivize your opponent from shooting those Rhinos, because they don't want your Berserkers to blood surge into them. Now there's the caveat here that if you do this, you've blood surged in, therefore you haven't charged, which means you don't get the Lance from the Goretrack Onslaught detachment, because Lance is tied to having made a charge move, and your opponent's going to be able to fight you if they charge you with something else, and they're going to be able to kill you anyway. So there's some caveats to this. It's not always going to be immensely valuable, but it does have the capacity to be immensely valuable, so it's definitely one you want to keep in your toolbox. Alright, now that we've had our word on Goretrack Onslaught and we've talked about the different stratagems that are available to the Rhinos, let's pull out some models, have a look on the table, and I'm going to demonstrate top 10 tricks that you can do with a Rhino in any World Eaters detachment that are going to flip games and give you these massive wins. G'day guys, let's take a second to thank today's sponsor Adept Roll, a bloody ripper app that calculates expected outcomes across a variety of in-game scenarios with precision. With Adept Roll, you can input or import unit profiles to calculate probabilities of outcomes and apply modifiers both offensively and defensively within seconds, allowing you to make wiser and more informed decisions when writing lists and when making in-game decisions. Adept Roll is free to use, or grab the paid version, which is an inexpensive and packed full of fair dinkum features that will help you play like an exalted wargamer today. Thanks again to Adept Roll for sponsoring the video, and now let's get back to the show. Alrighty guys, I've got out a whole bunch of models here so that we can go through a ton of different scenarios so that you can understand how to get the most out of your World Eaters Rhinos. Let's flip the camera and have a look around the environment first, and then we'll talk about some of these really awesome scenarios, tactics and strategies that you can do with your Rhino. Alrighty guys, so here's the table that we have set up. We've got a World Eaters army deployed on this side relatively defensively. We've got Hellbrood, Smaller Fiends, Lord of Skulls, Rhinos, Spawn, all of the stuff you'd typically see in a standard World Eaters army. We've got some 8-bound there, Demon Prince, some Forge Fiends, and a couple of Rhinos. Now, this is primarily just to give you an example. This isn't an exact list or anything like that, but we're going to use these models to demonstrate how to get the most out of your Rhinos. And then the opposition that we've got here is a Night Lord's army. We've got some Warp Talons, some Legionaries. Over here we've got some Possessed, we've got a Vindicator, a Rhino, some Havocs, another Vindicator, Abaddon the Despoiler leading some Chosen, a Chaos Lord leading some more Legionaries, another Rhino, and another Vindicator, just as an example of something that you could expect to face across the table, and we're going to use the Rhinos to great effect. Alright, this first trick is a relatively simple one. As you can see, we've got a Rhino here full of Khorne Berserkers, and across the way we've got a Vindicator and some Possessed. They're the main elements that are going to be in play for this trick, and this one is all about staging. So if you just had Berserkers on foot here, it would be very difficult to get them into a position where they're simultaneously safe from enemy threats and able to project a threat into your opponent. However, with a Rhino, what we're going to be able to do is basically move this Rhino up into this corner of this ruin up here. You could advance if you needed to, and that's going to give you a lot of movement, a lot more movement than a normal Berserker unit would get. And then from that staging position, that Rhino is safe from that Vindicator, cannot be shot, and the Berserkers inside are safe from those Possessed, because the Possessed cannot allocate attacks to the Berserkers because they're inside the Rhino. So this is what we call staging. We've now positioned that Rhino so that those Berserkers inside are safe, they're unable to be interacted with effectively, and they're projecting a threat into their opponent. Because now when it ticks over into your opponent's turn, if they don't do anything, in your next turn, those Berserkers are going to be able to disembark on this side of the wall, then move, then if you're in Berserker's Warband, they're going to be able to advance, and then charge those Possessed and kill them all. So your opponent has to do something to deal with this Khorne Berserker unit, and they're going to really struggle to because it's staged effectively. They can't shoot it, and they can't kill the Berserkers. They could send these Possessed in to kill the Rhino, but that doesn't really achieve their goal, because then the Berserkers are going to disembark out, and then it's going to tick over to your turn, and you're going to charge those Possessed and kill them anyway. So either way, your opponent's now put in a position where those Possessed are in a lot of trouble, and it's all thanks to the Rhino. Without a Rhino, if you moved your Berserkers up into this corner here, those Possessed would be able to just move over, advance if they had the ability to, and then charge those Berserkers and kill all your Berserkers before your Berserkers got to strike. So that 85-point investment on the Rhino has just completely changed the way that that Khorne Berserker unit is going to operate, and that is by what we call effective staging. The key to staging is just making sure that you're using the Rhino to get your Berserkers into a position where they are very safe from shooting threats, and by being in the Rhino themselves, they are inherently safe from melee threats. Alright, this next trick is one of my all-time favorite Rhino tricks, and I call it the Clown Car, where basically you use one Rhino for 2 units of Khorne Berserkers. And what you do in this situation is, let's say that that Rhino in the center here has got a unit of Khorne Berserkers inside of it, and then we've got another unit of Khorne Berserkers over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to disembark these Khorne Berserkers that are inside, like so, and then move them up there 8 inches, and they're going to go fight those Possessed down the back there, right? So maybe in the previous turn you've staged this Rhino up so that it's in a position that you want it, or whatever. You've gone out and you're pulling off your play where you're going to kill those Possessed. So something like so. Right, they've now disembarked. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn this Rhino into a Clown Car by, in the same movement phase, we're going to move all of these Berserkers to 8 inches, which is going to get them within 3 inches of that Rhino. Right, so these Berserkers are now going to embark in the Rhino, just like so. And now that Rhino is going to move its 12 inches, and it's going to get all the way over here. And now we've moved that Rhino so that it's on that objective. The Berserkers that were over here have now effectively moved a total of like 26 inches because of their movement, their embarking, then the moving and potentially advancing of that Rhino to get it all the way across the board. So you've now simultaneously used it to springboard out these Berserkers to attack these Possessed, and used it to Clown Car these Berserkers all the way over here, and that sets them up to go down that side of the board in later turns. So that's called the Clown Car, where you use a single Rhino to activate 2 units of Khorne Berserkers. And my general rule of thumb when writing a list is that you want one Rhino for every Berserker squad that you have, -1. So if you have 1 unit, you only need 1 or none. If you have 2 units, you need 1. If you have 3 units, you need 2. If you have 4 units, you need 3, etc. So you basically want to have 1 unit of Berserkers outside, and then the rest inside Rhinos. And that way you can use this clown car move effectively throughout the game. Alright, this next one's actually quite simple, but it works well in tandem with some of the other tricks that we've shown so far, and that is just using your Rhino as an action monkey. You know, the game's all about winning victory points, so you need to have something that's able to do those actions, and Rhinos are actually surprisingly good at it. So we're going to take these Khorne Berserkers as we did before, we're going to disembark them up here, they're going to go in and they're going to charge those possessed up there, just like we did in the previous tricks. Berserkers go in and do what they do best and kill things. And then the Rhino does one of the things that the Rhino does best, and it uses its big 12-inch movement to move all the way over onto that center objective and does establish locus, right? So there's plenty of secondaries that revolve doing actions or getting into table quarters or any of those sorts of things. And Rhinos are actually really good at it because they've got a decent move characteristic and they're quite tough. So your opponent's not going to easily overwatch them to death or be able to do any kind of shenanigans to stop you. They're really, really effective at it. And because they're serving multiple purposes, such as being a staging point for your Berserkers, being able to absorb Overwatch, being able to stage, launch your Berserkers out, do all the stuff that they do, adding on top of that they're in a very effective action monkey is quite good. And they're also quite good at things like sabotage or the other secondaries where you have to survive till the next turn, so your opponent gets a turn to interact with you. They're really effective at those because for their points, they're actually quite tough units. And they're also, because they don't project a threat once they've been emptied, once there's no Berserkers inside, they're not really a threatening thing. Your opponent's going to have a hard time justifying putting sufficient damage into the Rhino to kill it. They're going to be much more interested in trying to kill the Khorne Berserkers that are in their face, or the Exalted 8-bound, or that Forge Fiend that's threatening to shoot them next turn. So using your Rhinos as action monkeys is very, very effective. G'day guys, want to join us and become an Exalted Wargamer? Then check out our Patreon. Show your support for the free YouTube content with a monthly supporter subscription. Think of it like buying me a beer to say thanks, mate. Gain access to the Exalted community, including our Discord server, where we discuss everything from tactics, strategy, list writing advice, to memes, banter, and hobby updates. Join Team Exalted for more direct coaching and advice in preparation for upcoming events, and get tailored advice for key meta environments and matchups, or help working through some of the more challenging and complex aspects of Warhammer 40k. Or become part of the Exalted Inner Circle for access to private one-on-one coaching, including video calls and more, a dedicated coaching service aimed to provide mentorship and drive real improvement. Check out exalted40k.com for more information and become an Exalted Wargamer today. Alright, in this next scenario, we're going to show you how to use a Rhino to block a heroic intervention. So let's say your opponent's got a big unit of Possessed with a Master of Possessions there, and then he's got a unit of Warp Talons there, and you've got just a single unit of Khorne Berserkers in here, and you want to be able to kill one of these units, and you want to have your Berserkers alive at the end of the turn, right? So normally, if you were to come out with your Berserkers, disembark, move their 8, so essentially get an 11-inch move outside of that, gets you right up to the front of these Warp Talons. If you were to do something like this, move you guys out, get as close as you can, as always. And then you were to go, cool, Berserkers have disembarked, I've got no shooting, so we're going to go over to the charge phase, and I'm going to charge those Berserkers into those Warp Talons. The second you do that, your opponent's going to heroically intervene with these Possessed. You're going to fight first because you made a charge. You're going to wipe out those Warp Talons, but then in your turn, your opponent's Possessed are going to wipe out most of, if not all of those Khorne Berserkers, and you're going to have nothing left. And then it's going to tick over to your opponent's turn. Those Possessed are going to be free to go off and charge whatever you have holding your backfield down here. So what we're going to do to prevent them from being able to kill us in our own turn is we're going to move this Rhino around. So he's going to move from front to front back like 6 inches there. Then he can move 6 inches straight across, right up into there. And now we're going to go into the charge phase, And what we're actually going to do is we're going to charge the Rhino into those possessed, and we're going to base contact a few of them like that. And now, because those possessed are in engagement range, they are no longer eligible to heroically intervene. So when we charge these berserkers into those warp talons, he can't heroically intervene with those possessed. Now, at this stage, he could, in theory, heroically intervene into the Rhino with those warp talons, but doing so is not going to prevent you from charging those Khorne berserkers into the warp talons and killing them all. Because worst case scenario, that heroic intervention just brings him a little bit closer to you and makes it a little bit easier for you to go in and do your damage. So he's not going to bother. You're going to now charge. You're going to wipe them out. Then he's probably going to kill that Rhino, but he's not killing your Khorne berserkers. And then, depending on what blessings you took, you might have taken fight on death. And now, in his turn, when he goes and kills those possessed, you're going to fight back. You're going to kill half of those possessed. And then you're going to be able to pick up the remaining ones in your subsequent turn with whatever you had down here. Whereas if you didn't, if you had charged there, he heroically intervenes, you kill them, he fights, kills you, you can't fight on death because you've already fought, so therefore you just get wiped out, his possession is now here, and then it's free to come down and attack everything that's down here. So throwing your Rhino in to absorb his capacity to heroically intervene is going to do a huge number on your opponent's capacity to take your backfield. Those berserkers are going to die regardless. That's okay, we know that. But doing this means that they die in your opponent's turn. You never want your stuff to die in your own turn. That's one of the worst things that can happen in a game of 40k, is that your stuff dies in your turn, whether that be by getting overwatched, whether that be by losing fights. That's one thing that you really need to avoid, especially when the majority of your damage comes from a single phase. You really need to make sure that you're not losing units in your own turn. And one of the best ways to do that is to use your Rhinos to prevent those sorts of shenanigans. Alright, this next trick we call tagging. Now for this trick we've got a Rhino here with Khorne berserkers inside, and we've got a unit here that has 10 chosen, led by Abaddon the Despoiler. Now this is a terrifying melee unit that's also very, very tough. And we want to deal with that in a really effective way. So what we're going to do is we're going to disembark our berserkers first. They jump out there 3 inches. And if you want an easy way to measure that 3-inch disembark, you can pick up one of these exalted tools from my Etsy store. But basically you jump out your 3 inches from the Rhino, something like so. I'm not going to be super precise here because I'm mainly doing it to illustrate a point, but you jump out your berserkers something like so that they are all within 3 inches of that Rhino's hull. Then, in your movement, you're going to move your berserkers up. They're 8 inches, sorry. Now, I've also got this tool if you want something that's good for measuring that sort of distance, but for this instance, we're just going to use the tape measure. We're going to move up our 8 inches. Now, if you were in Berserker's Warband, of course, you could charge at this point. However, we're not going to need to because we're really, really close to our opponent as it is. So you move up roughly your 8 inches like so. And then here's where the Rhino comes into play. If you had just charged that unit, there's every chance that Abaddon is going to be able to strike and kill those Khorne berserkers, presuming you don't wipe out the whole unit and you have to allocate your attacks to Abaddon last, right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to move the Rhino up its 12 inches as well to here. And now when we tick over to the charge phase, the Rhino is going to charge first, and it is going to base-to-base contact Abaddon the Despoiler, right? And now that he's in base-to-base contact, and we're probably going sideways like this to base contact a few of those chosen as well. So it's now base-to-base with them. Now these Khorne berserkers can charge and get as many of their guys in as possible. They'd probably have to charge that Rhino as well, just so that they can all fit. Get everybody within base to base of somebody who's within base to base, so that they all get to make their attacks. In this instance, there's probably one guy that's not going to get to strike, potentially. And now, basically, when we fight, let's say we don't have any CP, so we can't put the extra AP on or anything like that. So we fight and we kill like 7 chosen, right? If our opponent removes these front 7, like so, like that, now when they go to act with Abaddon's unit, he has to hit the Rhino. Whereas if the Rhino wasn't there, if we didn't charge that Rhino in, so say the Rhino was over here somewhere, he's going to be able to go, cool, I'm going to pile this guy in here, this guy in here, this guy in here, and then Abaddon's going to pile in here, and then Abaddon's going to get to strike and wipe out this Khorne Berserker unit. But because we've tagged, and this is why this trick is called tagging, because we've tagged these models with our Rhino, Abaddon is going to have no choice but to strike the Rhino. Because he's in base contact, he doesn't get to make a pile-in move, and because he's not within base to base of somebody who is within base to base of the Berserker unit, he cannot allocate attacks to those Berserkers. Which means in your turn, Abaddon's going to send this Rhino to space, he's going to kill it. You know, these couple of guys might kill 1 or 2 Berserkers, and now it ticks over to your opponent's turn, and because Abaddon's unit is still engaged with this unit, you'll get to fight him first in your turn, because he's not making a charge this turn, so it's an ongoing combat, and ongoing combats, the opposing player gets the first activation. So now you're going to be able to activate these guys, pile in a bunch of this stuff, and finish that unit off. So because of the Rhino, we kept that Berserker unit alive, we kept his unit engaged, and were able to use 2 activations to wipe out that very durable unit. Now, if he had some ability to fall back and charge, for example, that would change the math, of course, because he'd be able to fall back and then charge back in, and then because he made a charge, he would get to strike first. So there's plenty of caveats to this, but using the Rhino to tag the models within a target unit that you want to not get to make attacks against your Berserkers is a very effective way of using Rhinos to absorb damage. Alrighty, for this next example, we've got a Rhino here with Khorne Berserkers in it. We've also got a unit of Exalted 8-bound led by a Slaughterbound. And then we've got a smattering of Night Lords here, the important one being this Vindicator. Now, your opponent has 1 command point and they're planning to use Overwatch, and you're going to try to play around that using the Rhino. And basically, what you could do is you could talk to your opponent about this Exalted 8-bound unit and how it's going to very easily rip that Vindicator apart. So your opponent is going to be like, I'm going to save my Overwatch so that I can kill those Exalted 8-bound, right? Then what you do is you disembark and then move your Berserkers out like so, so that they're going to hit these Chosen, or propose that they're going to hit those Chosen, right? And then you ask your opponent, would you like to Overwatch the Berserkers? And he's going to be like, well, no, because A, you're going to Blood Surge into me if I do that, and B, I want to save my Overwatch to hit those Exalted 8-bound. So then what you do is you go, cool, now I'm going to move my Rhino in. My Rhino is going to go over here. And then your opponent's like, okay. And now you go, cool, I'm not going to move the Exalted 8-bound, or I'm going to move the Exalted 8-bound out this way. They're 9 inches so that they're outside a line of sight of that Vindicator. And you just say they're going to go for those Havocs over in the corner there. So they go out like that. Now your opponent can't Overwatch them. And then your opponent goes, oh, it's fine. I'll just do the Overwatch in the charge phase because I can still Overwatch those Khorne Berserkers because I can still see them. And I can do it at the start of their charge move. So I'm still going to get value out of my Overwatch stratagem. And you go, no, you're not, because I'm going to first charge the Rhino into that Vindicator. And now, because the Rhino is in base contact with the Vindicator, it is no longer eligible to make Overwatch attacks. And now, these Khorne Berserkers are free to charge where they want, and these Exalted 8-bound are free to charge where they want, without your opponent ever having had an opportunity to use his Overwatch. So the key things to note here are to sequence your moves correctly. Because if you had moved those Exalted 8-bound out first into a position where that Vindicator could see them, he's just going to Overwatch you in the movement phase. Whereas what you do is you move out your Khorne Berserkers and you have those Exalted 8-bound positioned in such a way that you're threatening to move somewhere where he's going to want to use Overwatch, but you never let him do it. Because then when he decides he doesn't want to Overwatch the Berserkers because he's saving it for them, you then move the Rhino, he doesn't Overwatch the Rhino because he's saving it for them, and then when you go into the charge phase, you charge the Vindicator as the very first thing, and then everything else in your army is free to charge without threats of Overwatch. Alright, up until this stage, pretty much every strategy that we've discussed has been available to anybody that has Rhinos. However, these next couple are exclusively available to the World Eaters because our Rhino has the ability to reactively disembark when enemy models end a move within 9 inches. So let's say in this scenario we've got a Forge Fiend over here, we've got a Rhino that's full of Berserkers, and our opponent has this unit of Warp Talons. Now they want to charge this Forge Fiend because they know that Forge Fiends are not particularly scary in combat, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to move their 12 inches up, like so, with their intent on charging into that Forge Fiend. So they've moved up, and now, because they've ended that move within 9 inches, well within 9 inches of that Rhino, we're going to be able to reactively disembark. Now, one of the important tricks to note here is you want to disembark behind your Rhino in order to pull this trick off. Because if you disembark out the front, now your opponent is just going to charge the Khorne Berserkers. But if you disembark out the back like so, where your opponent is not going to be able to effectively charge you, you can do a lot of really good stuff. So I'll show you how it works. Basically, we'll disembark these guys as so. And you want to put them in a position where they're not super vulnerable to being charged. Now, with things like Warp Talons, there's always a chance that they're going to roll super hot for their charge. But if you go something like that, in order for them to successfully charge these Khorne Berserkers, they'd need to roll a 10 on their charge in order to jump this guy over into this gap to touch this character. So they're not going to do that. So instead, they're going to go, okay, well, now if I stay here, next turn, those Berserkers jump out, kill them, this Forge Fiend's still alive, it then goes and kills those Possessed down the back there. So that's a huge problem. So they are going to instead go ahead with the plan and accept that they're going to lose those Warp Talons. So they're going to roll their charge. They're going to roll 4. Say they're going to CP reroll that into a 10. So it's a 6 and a 4. So now they're going to have to put everybody in base contact that can. Will have to go in. So it's going to be something like this. So that's everybody that can base, and then the rest of them just come up behind. So now they've finished their charge into that Forge Fiend, but now you can heroically intervene and you're within 3 inches, so even a 2 will get you in. So we roll our thing, and look, would you look at that, we roll a 2. But yeah, so they go in, he's able to tag there, these Berserkers are able to tag up behind. Basically each one of them gets to move 2 inches, which is not much because of that roll. But this is actually good, because now your opponent can only attack those Berserkers because they're going to fight first, of course, because they made their charge. So everybody that's in base contact with that Forge Fiend, and just that Forge Fiend, has to fight it. And only guys that are within base contact with the Berserkers, or within base of somebody who's in base, can fight them. Which in this instance is actually only 2 of those Warp Talons can fight those Berserkers. Because this guy's not within base contact of either, and because we rolled really low on our heroic, we actually didn't get to base him. But basically we've wrapped around here, and they're going to fight. So they're going to fight. They're probably going to kill that Forge Fiend with their reroll wounds and lethal hits and things like that. So they're probably going to kill that. But then we now get to activate. They're probably going to kill 1 or 2 Berserkers. You just remove them from the back. And now we get to activate. And assuming we have our 6-inch pile in and heroic up, we can get our little exalted measuring stick, which has a 6-inch edge on it along the bottom here. That's from there to there is 6 inches, which makes your heroic interventions really good. You just go, cool, that guy's going to go to there. Not heroic intervention, sorry, I meant your pile-ins consolidates. He's going to go there. He's going to go in there. This guy can now go to there. Ending closer to closest. He's going to fit in that gap there. And then they're going to swing around like so. So everybody's moved their 6 inches. And now we get to fight with that Khorne Berserker unit here and wipe out that Warp Talon unit. So yes, we lost our Forge Fiend. We were going to anyway. But thanks to the reactive disembark from the Rhino and the heroic intervention from those Khorne Berserkers, we've been able to wipe out those Warp Talons. So that's a really effective use of a Rhino in a World Eater's army. Is setting it up in such a way that if your opponent goes for any of your shooting targets like your Forge Fiends, or even things like Hellbrutes or Spawn or Jackals or anything like that, you're set up in such a way that you can reactively disembark to where they can't charge you, but to where you can heroic. And that's going to create situations like this, where your opponent is going to have no real effective way of dealing with that Forge Fiend. Alright, this next trick is also a relatively simple one. Your opponent's got a Vindicator here, you have a Rhino that's sitting on an objective marker, and your opponent wants to take that objective marker off you. Now, they can't see you, and even with their movement characteristic, they're not going to be able to get into a position where they can see you, and as a result, they have no real effective way of killing that Rhino. But what they can do is use the superior OC characteristic of the Vindicator, which is 3, and the OC characteristic of the Rhino is only 2, which means they can just go, cool, I'm just going to move up and toe on that objective, and now I've taken that objective off of you, and maybe it shoots down range at something else, right? That would normally be a big problem, but World Eaters Rhinos have that reactive disembark. So I call this the Reactive OC dump, where you just go, cool, when they finish their move, I'm just going to reactively disembark a bunch of OC2 Khorne Berserkers onto the objective. And because Berserkers have that high OC characteristic, they're actually really effective at this. Even if somebody put like an OC10 model on there to try to take it from you, you can very easily just go, no, I'm just going to disembark and put 20 OC on there, and plus the 2 from the Rhino, plus the 1 from the character, means you've got 23 objective control on that objective, and it's all stuff that they can't interact with. And the best thing about this is that you don't have to do this. What you can do is you put the Rhino there, and when your opponent goes to move, you can just say to them, hey mate, just so you know, if you do that, I'm going to be able to just reactively disembark and take that objective off you, so it's not going to work. And then your opponent just goes, oh yeah, good point, I won't move the Vindicator there, thank you for letting me know, and they'll move their Vindicator somewhere else and go do something else. And as a result, this Rhino has been able to effectively sit here, holding Khorne Berserkers, and behaving like an OC23 unit, even though it's only an OC2 unit. And because you're basically able to treat these Berserkers like they're out and in at the same time. It's Schrodinger's Berserkers. They're simultaneously, they're inside the Rhino, so they're positioned, staged, to be able to go out and do their things, but they're also treated as if they're outside of the Rhino and holding the objective. So that's a really, really powerful combo that's exclusive to World Eaters Rhinos. Alright, so for this next scenario, we've got a lone op Demon Prince who can't be shot because he's within 3 inches of these 2 spawn. We've got a Rhino full of Berserkers here, and then we've got a whole bunch of shooting damage, Vindicators, Havocs, and a Legionary squad over here. Now, your opponent currently can't see these spawn because of the angle of that ruin. So what they're going to do in order to try to kill this Demon Prince is they're going to try to move so that they can see the spawn, shoot the spawn, and kill them. That leaves the Demon Prince unprotected, which then means that the rest of the army can shoot that Demon Prince even though they're outside of 12 inches, right? So the first thing they do is they move these Havocs forward a bit so that they're no longer obscured by that ruin, which now allows them to see down here. Then they move these Havocs up for a similar purpose so that they can get line of sight on the Demon Prince once those spawn are removed, and the Vindicators can both see the Demon Prince from there anyway. So your opponent's like, yep, that's my movement phase, and you go, cool, well, you've just finished moving a Havoc unit, so I'm going to reactively disembark, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of Berserkers within 3 inches of that Demon Prince, and then a couple out the front here, as far forward as you can, and as close to those Havocs as possible. And now, your opponent is in a really tricky spot, because even if they were to go with their original plan, and go, cool, the Havocs are going to shoot and kill these guys here, they are not now going to be able to shoot that Demon Prince because those Khorne Berserkers are within 3 inches. So they can't shoot the Demon Prince, and if they try to shoot the Khorne Berserkers, you're going to be able to Blood Surge move into and hit those Havocs. And if you've Blood Surged into those Havocs before they've shot, you're going to deny them shooting altogether. And if you can do lots of cool stuff here where you can basically block and prevent your opponent from being able to shoot that Demon Prince through a combination of reactive disembarks to put them within 3 inches, and because you have that Blood Surge move, that unit's effectively invulnerable. If that was a unit of Jackals or something, this wouldn't work, because the Jackals, they would just go, I'll just shoot the Jackals then. I'll just, whatever units I've got over here, maybe these Legionaries over here, well, they'll just shoot and kill all the Jackals, and now I can shoot the Demon Prince with my Vindicators. But because of this, your opponent's in a position where they go, I guess I'll shoot one of my Vindicators into the Berserkers. Maybe they're called 4 or 5, but then you Blood Surge move into those Havocs, that second Vindicator now can't shoot those Khorne Berserkers. And with your Blood Surge moves, if you're really clever with it, you can do it in such a way to keep one Berserker within 3 inches of that Demon Prince, which means that second Vindicator still can't shoot the Demon Prince, and now it can't even shoot the Khorne Berserkers. So you've done this in a really clever way to prevent your opponent from being able to take out that Demon Prince, and that's a really effective way of combining the Blood Surge move from the Khorne Berserkers, the reactive Disembark from the Rhino, and the 12-inch Lone Op from the Demon Prince. Alrighty, for this last trick, we're going to show you just how fast a Rhino can make a unit of Khorne Berserkers by springboarding them into combat. So we've got a unit of Khorne Berserkers here, we've got an empty Rhino here, and then we've got Abaddon and he's chosen all the way here. Now this is a standard 60-inch Warhammer 40k match play board. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with these Khorne Berserkers, and they're basically going to advance up to embark in this Rhino. So we're going to roll their advance move. We rolled a healthy 4. So that means these Khorne Berserkers get to move 12 inches, so they get the 8-inch move characteristic plus the 4, and then as long as they're within 3 inches of this Rhino, they can embark in it. So that means that they're going to be moving up all the way to here with their 12 inches worth of move. They actually could probably move a little bit further than that if they really needed to, but they don't, because now they've all ended their move within 3 inches of this Rhino, so they're going to embark in the Rhino. So I'm going to remove them from the board. And now that Rhino is going to move, and it's also going to advance. And it rolled a healthy 5, so it's now got 17 inches worth of movement, which means that from where it is there, it can go all the way up to here. So 17 inches in a straight line, like so. And that's your first turn. So those Berserkers have moved from this edge of the board here up to effectively there, which is essentially a 34-ish inch move. Now, in your next turn, this unit of Abaddon, they can't really deal with you. So in your turn, you're then going to disembark these Khorne Berserkers before the Rhino moves. So you get out your 3 inches. You make sure you get out as far forward as you can. So there's your Khorne Berserkers with, in this case, we've got a Master of Executions, and they're going to be all within 3 inches of that transport, like so. Now we go into their movement phase. They're going to advance. They roll a 2. We might spend a CP at this stage to re-roll that 2 into another 2. Isn't that always the way? But either way, that still gives us a 10-inch move from where they are, which gets us right up onto just on the other side of this ruin. So that's our movement phase. And now that Rhino is free to go and do what it chooses. Based on one of the other tricks, it might go absorb some Overwatch somewhere, or do an action, or whatever. Prevent a heroic intervention. And now we go into the charge phase, and those Khorne Berserkers are going to charge that Abaddon unit. They're going to need to roll a 5, and they roll a healthy 7, which gets them into combat. So in 2 turns, we've been able to use that Rhino to get these Khorne Berserkers from literally one extreme end of the table all the way to in combat on the other, which means that in 2 turns they have effectively traveled about 53 inches. Now, had they been on foot, had they not been inside a transport, they would have been moving forward their 8 with an advance. Then they would have had to move forward another 8 with another advance, which would have say they get 2 12-inch moves, gets them to about here, and then with the charge range, maximum, even if they rolled 12 inches on the charge, they're going to end roughly here, which is where they were at the end of their movement phase on the second turn, or at the start of their movement phase, sorry, on the second turn. So that is one of the ways that you can use a Rhino to absolutely launch your Khorne Berserkers across the battlefield. So now you would have noticed that why did we have an empty Rhino here? Is that a realistic in-game scenario? And absolutely it is. This is one of the reasons why I advocate for having multiple Rhinos in your list, because you might have had another unit of Khorne Berserkers, you might have moved the Rhino up, disembarked out those Khorne Berserkers, then in the next turn they're going to go off and do something, and then these Khorne Berserkers are able to move up, advance into the Rhino, then have the Rhino move. So you can use the Rhino for multiple units of Berserkers, You can also do this with something like jackals, for example. Like you might have, instead of berserkers here, you could imagine a scenario where you've got a rhino, he's stayed somewhere safe, he moves up, then in the next turn, those corn berserkers disembark and go and kill something. And now that your jackals have stickied your home objective, they can advance up and they can jump in the rhino. Then the rhino can move over here. Then in the next turn, those jackals can jump out and charge something that might be defending your opponent's home objective. So you can use that empty rhino to springboard jackals across the board as well. And this is one of the things that is a defining characteristic of the World Eaters, is that they are just so insanely fast. Being able to use an advance move to get inside the rhino, then an advance and charge on the disembark, is really, really fast. And the fact that Corn Berserkers in particular have that 8-inch move characteristic just makes them scary good at covering literally the biggest distance that is possible to cover. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good shit. Head over to exalted40k.com and you can check out our Patreon there. You can join our Discord community. You can pick up some merchandise. These are all fantastic ways of saying thank you for the free YouTube content that I put out there for you guys. And all of the revenue that comes in through those various sources, whether it be through the Patreon or through the merchandise sales, goes towards improving this channel and getting bigger and better videos for you guys. It's a really, really appreciated and fantastic way that you can show your support. So with that being said, thank you to those who do show continuous support, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.